morning. I'd like to call the Metro North Committee meeting for the month of December to order. The tragic development at Spite and Dive on Sunday, December 1st has shaken Metro North Railroad to its core. The loss of life and the injuries to our customers and fellow employees has deeply affected everyone who works at this railroad. I ask that you please join me in a moment of silence to remember the deceased, their families, and all those who were injured. Thank you. Our first public speaker, Mr. Warren Getz.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, members of the board. First thing, I want to wish everybody a happy holiday at this season and wish everybody the best for the new year. Just one thing, I know there is an ongoing investigation considering the derailment in Spite and Dial, but I think we have to hear from the conductor on that train. The conductor is the captain of the train. He is responsible for its safe operation, and in my opinion, he should have realized the train was going too fast and could have taken steps to slow it down. So we need to hear from the conductor. We also need a report about the new signal system that's being installed on the Port Jervis line. I understand it's going to be compatible with New Jersey Transit's system, which is based on piggybacking on Amtrak signaling system, which is called Access 2. And it does provide speed control on curves and has a lot of modern features. Also, the Pascagoula Valley line signal system was updated a few years ago. So since these serve Metro North customers, I think a report on these signal systems and how they operate would be very, very important to Metro North. Also, I'd like to bring up an issue about what New Jersey Transit is doing, and I think Metro North should look into it. New Jersey Transit is working with the Department of Energy to develop and design an advanced microgrid capable of keeping New Jersey Transit's electrified commuter lines powered during severe weather. The Department of Energy's Sandia National Laboratories is working with New Jersey Transit and the local utilities to come up with a first-of-its-kind electrical grid that can provide this power and provide a reliable electrical service under all circumstances. Since what happened on the New Haven line is a matter of concern, I think you should definitely look into this system and report back at a future meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Next public speaker is Murray Bowden.
Good morning. Can you see my fire engines from up there? I'm going to talk about fire engines today because they represent the old and the new. Traditionally, we've used red fire engines, and the only problem is yellow is easier to see. But the transition in small fire companies upstate has been to yellow. New York City still uses red. Why? Tradition, but it's not as safe. There are a lot of things I would like to discuss today, but I choose not to, and I talk about tradition, safety, and recognizing that things we've done for 50 years are no longer appropriate. There's an enormous cultural problem. This is culture. We've always done it this way. Yeah, I used to do it the old way too. Now, the reports that you're giving out today are on my iPad. I do my email from here. Do a lot of things from here. The transition from the old way of doing it to the new is very difficult. The culture is so ingrained that it's difficult to break. And the easiest way is for me to say, hey, from out there, which can you see easier? How about you back there? Which is more obvious? There's an enormous amount I'd like to say today, but those of you who are interested, I've written a few emails on the subject. They're available if anybody wants to see them. Thank you for your time.
Okay, our third and last public speaker is Bill Henderson.
Good morning. Thank this board for the opportunity to speak before the discussion that you'll have today of the tragic incident of December 1st. So much has happened over the past 2 weeks, it's difficult to take stock of where we are. For the families of those killed on December 1st and those seriously injured, life will never be the same. And the riders' hearts go out to them, together with our thoughts and prayers. As you're well aware, the accident has shaken riders not only at Metro North but throughout the region and nation. Holding these discussions in a public session is a positive step, as riders need to be assured that the commitment of the MTA and its agencies to the safety of riders and employees, and know that the MTA is focused on ensuring their safety. We wrote to the members of this board with issues that must be addressed, and we hope that the board will act as advocates for riders, employees, and above all, the MTA system and nation and region. You're in a real sense the trustees of this system, and we have every confidence that you will act in its best interests. We also recognize that this is not a simple task and there are no easy answers. We look forward to today's presentation and the unfolding investigation, and with their input, moving forward in a positive direction. The investigation of the derailment will be long, and information that comes from it and its findings may be difficult to hear, but we urge you to move ahead with a clear vision and work to improve the safety of travel and restore the confidence of riders and the people of this region in this system. To do so is vital to the future of the region and state. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, can I get an approval of the minutes of November 12th? Can I get a motion? Second? All in favor? Any opposed? Carried. Any changes to our work plan? I don't believe so. Howard.
Okay. Good morning, and thank you, Jim. As you mentioned, we'll be talking afterwards about the derailment of Spuyten Duyvil. So let me address all the other business in front of the committee today. First off, I want to tell the committee that we have completed the right-of-way improvements in the Bronx. That was something we've talked about for the last months. That will improve both safety in the Bronx on the right-of-way, as well as the ability to reliably operate the trains. We operated for the last 5 months with a loss of 25 to 50% of the capacity through the Bronx. That is now completed. We also are working throughout the rest of the system where we have track conditions, and weather permitting will be, depending on the weather, will determine how many of these different areas and speed restrictions that we'll be fixing over the next months. Once this is done, we will then in springtime again go back and finish the number of places where we have track issues on the 3 lines, and that will then become a continuing program throughout 2014 going forward. All of this is absolutely critical to the safe and reliable operation of Metro North, and I want to thank all our customers for their patience during this 6 months while we were operating this service on the limited trackage. Secondly, I want to let the committee know on January 18th, we're going to have a schedule change. We will, at that time, this schedule for all 3 lines will reflect the improvements that were made in the Bronx, and we'll be reducing the running times on all 3 lines while ensuring we operate in the safest way possible. Also, we'll be able to return service at Melrose and Tremont. We've had a temporary bus service in there supported by New York City Transit for months. We'll now be able to go back to regular train service. Thirdly, I want to report that we have begun the implementation of our enhanced employee protection system called EAPS. This is one of the most important steps we can take to increase the safety of our roadway workers. What it involves is the roadway worker himself, the person working on the track, is now involved in the placement and removal of track blocks. We have developed and tested the system. Over the past month, we have implemented it on the Harlem line, and we'll be rolling out the Hudson line later this week, and then the New Haven line will be following shortly thereafter in January. So this will be a significant improvement in terms of just the safety of our people working on the tracks. From a financial standpoint, the results are in the book. The year-to-date October financials are favorable, and they continue to be positive compared to the budget. Also, on January 1st, fares on the Connecticut portion of the New Haven line will increase by about 5%. This will generate about $10 million, of which the MTA share is a little over $1 million. The fare increase is the third of the 3 consecutive Connecticut fare increases of about 5%, which were adopted by Connecticut and approved for implementation by the board in October 2011. So this increase affects ticket prices for travel between Connecticut and New York, as well as stations within Connecticut. In addition, there will be a 2.5% increase for travel between Rye and Portchester and a limited number of other stations. These fares were approved by the board in March 2013, but were subject to a phased implementation so that the fare from Rye and Portchester did not exceed the fare from Greenwich. So when everyone else in March went up by 9%, the fares from these stations were raised by about 6.5%. This is the remaining 2.5% increase. With regard to ridership, October 2013 was much higher than 2012, but 2012 was impacted by Superstorm Sandy, so that's really not a particularly important comparison. Year-to-date through October, ridership is basically level. It's up 0.1% compared to 2012. With regard to capital projects, I'm pleased to say that we completed the third of major project along the Hudson line to improve right-of-way drainage and the safety associated with water coming onto the right-of-way. This was the stabilization project north of Peekskill that we had washouts and rock slides. That's now done. We completed the Sing Sing Creek earlier, and we completed in Riverdale the improvements there as well. And then finally, in January, we are going to break ground for the construction of a new 500-car parking garage in North White Plains. Initially what we're doing is demolishing the current garage, which has 109 spaces. We then will relocate the customers to the west side of the right-of-way, working with Westchester County. We've created some more spaces there, so we don't anticipate a problem during construction. Jim, that's my report.
Okay. We have one action item, that is the 2014 final proposed budget. I know we've been briefed, and can I get a motion to pass this on to the full board? Second? All in favor? Any opposed? Carried. Howard, information items.
Yes. Give me 1 minute. Sorry here, Jim. We have, for information items, we have the work plan, which we talked about. We have the elevator and escalator report this is the third quarter report. What you see here is we have high reliability at the elevators at the outlying stations. That continues. That with regard to Grand Central, which we've been focused on, we've made significant improvements in reliability of the escalators in Grand Central. The numbers are significantly higher. We have one more escalator that has to be taken out of service to be rehabilitated. That's up at North End Access. We'll do that in early 2014. And then starting in late 14 or early 15, we'll be doing the project to replace these escalators with the appropriate heavy-duty escalators that you need for the volumes of people in Grand Central, and that will be done over late 2014 through 2016.
Okay. Next on our...
Excuse me, just a quick question about the time that it will take to replace individual escalators. It sounds like is it a much more difficult and therefore time-consuming project to take those out than to do the fixes that we've done?
Yes, Jim. Well, the fixes that have been done, we're basically taking what's there and making repairs and some level of upgrade. These escalators were never designed for the heavy volumes that are seen in Grand Central Terminal. So we're going to a much heavier duty escalator, which will in fact be a complete replacement, so it will take more time.
questions? Okay, on pages 45 and 46, we have two non-competitive procurements totaling $2,950,000. Can I get a motion in a second? And then some discussion. Motion, please. Second? Okay, discussion. Any questions? All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Next, we have the competitive procurements, four, totaling $24,505,313. Can I get a motion, please?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I have questions concerning two of these competitives.
Okay, let me get a motion in a second. We'll go to questions.
Very well.
Motion, please. Second? Okay. Chuck?
I'd like to take you to page 50, the Clouder modification. This is the third modification of that contract. And what it has effectively done is significantly increase both the original price and every other number in the line. I'd like to know what the figure was that was proposed by the next highest bidder, and was this lowballing?
Chuck, let me explain why we've come the third time. The initial, the order for the M8s had a series of options associated with it. So there was not a X number of cars. You may recall there was a base number, we added 80 cars on, and then we added another 25 cars on. The original capital program did not have sufficient funding to do all of the 380 cars with Clouder. So at that time, we approved for 300 cars how much money we needed for them to do the inspection. The second time so that was the base contract. Then we came back and we added on the 80 cars, which was the change about a year or so ago, which we used liquidated damages for, equivalent value of liquidated damages. This now is the remainder of that, the remaining cars, and again, we're using liquidated damages or equivalent value to pay for this cost. So what really drove this was how we ordered the cars, not anything about how they bid the project.
Let me turn then to page 52, Georgetown. The sole source effectively here is a result of the unavailability of contractors available to perform the work. Both as to this contract and as to others, I'd like to ask the following question. Where you have an unavailability of trained personnel, where you have an unavailability of alternative contractors, can we appropriately add a condition that requires those contractors who are selected, because they're the only ones in the field, to train people to do it, so we have some competition in this area? This happens particularly in the area of minority employment. It would seem to me, and you'll hear it from me again later on, I'm going to add a motion to amend each of these to require the successful bidder to train the people who can be in the future people who can do these sort of things. I'm just asking,
Chuck,
why
yeah.
don't we do that?
So let me explain this contract. This, along with some of the other ratifications, came out of this contract supports all the track work we're doing. We originally got this slot train to do a cleanup, a station cleanup. This was the critical equipment we didn't have. It's not people, it's basically a train with operators, but it's a piece of equipment we don't own to do station right-of-way cleanup. That, because of the nature of what we had to do on the tracks, we had to suspend that program. This has become a critical piece of equipment as part of the track work.
I'm not quarreling with that.
Okay, so it's mostly equipment rental. What we did put in here is we are looking to buy our own piece of equipment. I think you've heard me say that Metro North is short on having sufficient, adequate mechanized equipment. We will do an analysis, and if it's economically more feasible to buy this and then operate it with our own people, we will do that. But there's a long lead time to do that, and so this will fill the gap, will give us this equipment while we either buy a new one and get it delivered, which will take some time. This fills that gap.
Howard, I have no question at all as to the validity or appropriateness of the contract. I'm just focused on those instances where we have single contractors in a field on the ground that nobody else is able to do it, and where we have employers who say they have nobody in elevators, for example, elevator inspectors, as you will hear in a while, where there is nobody able to do that work. I'd like to see that we use our contracts, that we give people as an opportunity to have those people train minorities and women so that they can get into the marketplace. Perhaps this is not that opportunity, but I think the concept is one we ought to start looking at.
Any other, Jim?
Howard, on the Clotter procurement, excuse me, did they give us a heads up at all, or were they involved in our understanding of the brake and cab signaling problems in the M8s as part of?
I'm not sure I know what you're referring to, Jim. What issue with cab signaling?
Well, I believe, if I looked over my notes, that the M8s are being delayed because they have had cab signal.
Maybe Timmy, or can you respond to that?
No, there were, I mean, there are issues with many of the systems on the cars, but as is typical of car procurement contracts, because there's a lot of integration that's done, but there was nothing specific about the cab signal or the brake system that in and of itself materially delayed the project. It was more a Kawasaki effort of, the delays have been more the integration and putting all of the systems together.
Jim, to your question, Clouder works with us, Metro North, and Clouder together identify issues on the cars. And jointly, we identify where we have problems. We use Clouder sometimes to help us solve those problems. But together, that's where we identify what the issues are, and then that becomes the basis of the negotiations with and discussions with Kawasaki for retrofits.
Yeah, thank you.
I just want to pick up on one thing that Chuck said. While I agree with Chuck's perspective on it, I wanted to come at it from a different perspective. I'm very concerned where we do not assign any MBE or WBE goals to a project like this. Because by allowing, which is what the last line of the staff summary says, I understand the highly specialized nature of the program, but the problem is, as long as this company, we employ them, there are no MBE or WBE standards. And that, I think, is wrong. While I understand the difficulty, we should do something with this company and all other companies to ensure they have MBE and WBE standards, even on projects of highly specialized nature. In fact, even maybe more importantly, on projects of a highly specialized nature. I'm not sure what the answer is, but I just think it's an issue that we cannot continue to just say, well, we don't set a standard because of a highly specialized nature. That, to me, is not an answer.
The requirements contract for the IT, that's an all-agency requirements contract?
Yes.
Does that, I'm just trying to understand the scope of this. This basically suggests that over the last 5 years or the next 2 years, we're going to spend another $17 or $18 million on IT consultants, and that there's 68 different firms that you can potentially choose from without going through a further bidding process. How does that work?
Yeah.
I mean, I always find requirements contracts as a way to sort of
Right.
act quickly, and I understand the
Yeah.
need for them.
Yeah.
They,
Let me, Anthony, could you just explain this contract, please?
It's a requirements contract wherein every task is competitively solicited between those vendors.
all 68?
68 vendors, depending on the category, there are 35 different categories.
These funds coming out of the operating budget? We spend $50 million a year on IT about $10 million a year on IT consultants,
Most of the funds are picked out of the operating budget by each of the agencies.
not out of the capital project that they're supporting?
There are specific projects when they're earmarked for capital, and those would be paid through the capital program.
And are there third-party, what's the word I'm looking for? It's a third-party contract that's sort of monitoring all these IT consultants?
We have the
Quality
new,
control?
we have the new IT chief where everything, as I stated in the staff summary sheet, the new IT chief through the chairman's.
Right, but do we have a third-party quality control consultant making sure these consultants are doing what they should be doing, that projects are moving in the direction they should
I
be
do
moving?
not believe we have a separate contractor that quality controls those contracts.
Is that something we've ever done or something we should look at?
We can look at it, I could discuss that with Sid. Right now, we handle it in-house, but I can discuss that with Sid.
I mean, my concern is obviously on a national scale. You have consultants driving projects, and without someone supporting you, almost like CPOC, we have a third party. I mean, these are big projects. These are a lot of IT consultants, and sometimes they're a lot, the reason why we have them is because they're a lot more sophisticated, know a lot more than our in-house talent does.
I will discuss that.
In some cases, they do, Jeff, but in other cases, there are additional arms and legs. But I will take the issue back to Sid. We have centralized the IT management. We're sending everything through a centralized business service center IT. And I will make sure that there's the appropriate quality control, whether it's inside with our own IT people or supplemented with an outside consultant.
Thanks.
Two questions, one on the Clouder. So basically, just like the capital plan, this was a contract that you had intended for the full 5 years, but it was only going to be funded for 2 years, so you've had to, by definition, extend it?
John, that was a big part of it. Then we made that decision a couple of years ago, you recall, to buy the single cars, which was a decision made, it was not initially part of the program. And when we made the decision to buy the single cars and retire all the old overage cars, that got added in, so that's the other piece. So it's a little of both.
So, but in '06, which predates my arrival, was it clear to the board that that's what was going on, just partial funding, but you have
Yes,
to come back?
yes,
Okay.
we can, if you'd like, we'll find go back and check, but I believe the answer is yes.
Okay, thanks. Then quickly, the second question on H, the multiple vendor pre-qualified. I agree with and support the notion, that's the way you explain it, sounds like the most efficient way to do things. But I do want to point out, by just extending this contract from '07, if you have entered the field as a small consulting firm in '07, '08, '09, 10, 11, 12, 13, plus the 5 years of this contract, which is in effect a full generation, you would have been locked out of the ability to compete for this work, or unless I'm reading it wrong. By not going
Are you
out
speaking
for
of the
a-
IT contract?
Yeah, H, the various pre-qualified IT consulting firms.
That
By
an-
just extending,
Yeah.
unless I'm reading it wrong,
Yeah.
it seems that by just extending the contract, you're precluding people who've gone into this field for over 10 years from competing for the work. That's minority or just small business, not minority.
It's not set up for the 10 years. It was set up for an initial 5 years. We did extend it where we had enough funding. But as I said earlier, there are different categories where different vendors are qualified for those different categories. So it's a continual competitive solicitation as tasks are requested
Excuse me, from a closed group.
from that 68 vendor pool.
Yeah.
So if you've entered the business, either from an existing firm, or you move to the area, or you're young and want to start out, you are precluded for this 12-year period from competing for the work.
Not 12, but you are precluded
11,
until the
sorry.
new solicitation goes out. And the new solicitation goes out in late 14.
Well, I'm troubled by freezing out newcomers for over 10 years.
Yeah. Okay. I think, again,
I mean, on the one hand, we want to encourage small business, but on the other, we preclude new small businesses for an over 10-year period from competing. The left hand and the right hand aren't communicating on this point.
let us go back and talk, again, we need to talk with Sid about this, and we'll take a look at that, John.
Could you hold this then until Wednesday so we could have that report?
Yeah.
It affects all the agencies, and there may be similar questions at the other committees. We can hold it.
Well, just further up, so if I'm at a firm and I split off, and I'm already on the list, but I go to a new firm, that means I'm all of a sudden precluded from competing for the work? That's a yes, so it doesn't seem fair for an 11-year period to lock people out.
I'm not sure that's the case, but we'll get it determined
Well,
for you.
that was the cherry on top of the sundae, so. Look, we're all working on the same point here, I'm just trying to help.
Yeah, understood.
Thanks.
Any other questions? As I understand, we're gonna vote on three. We're gonna vote on three of the competitive procurements, less the various contractor IT. Can I get a motion on the amended? Second? All in favor? Any opposed? Carried. Last but not least, we have some ratifications. We have 10 ratifications totaling $1,623,695. Can I get a motion? Second? Any discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? Carried. Tom?
Helena, if you'd please come in and sit down. I've had a number of calls with a number of the board members who have asked for more information than what they've received in letters that I've sent to them or what they've been able to get from the news media with respect to the derailment at Metro North on December 1st. And as a result of that, it was decided that in the interest of trying to have an open discussion in the appropriate forums, that we would end the Metro North Committee meeting as we start the Long Island Committee meeting with a discussion of the incident and what we know and some comments by me, and invite all the board members who could come. So a lot of you came today. There are some that couldn't make it today, so we expect to have another discussion at the board meeting on Wednesday. I think it's very important that you have the ability to not only get the access to the information that we have, but the ability to ask questions to very important issues that we all need to collectively answer. After making some opening comments, I'll turn over the floor to Howard, who can run through a number of things related to the investigation and actions we've taken following it in a factual manner, and then I'll close out. In my 39-year career, the majority of which has been at the MTA, I've had the unfortunate experience of having to deal with three tragedies. One was a fire at Clark Street in 1990. The other was a terrible derailment at 14th Street in 1991, and this incident. As Chief Executive Officer, I'm accountable for the operations of all the agencies, and I take that responsibility very seriously. I was at all of those events shortly after their occurrence. Due to a very unusual set of circumstances, I was at Spuyten Duyvil within 35 minutes of the occurrence. I apologize. I responded to the scene as victims were being removed, and you see very clearly firsthand the impact of the incident on people's lives. I was there throughout the entire day with a number of the members of senior management of Metro North, Howard Permit, Ann Kirsch, John Kesich, and others, and we all experienced that. When you see the damage done by the equipment and pieces of railroad equipment in places they don't belong and how far away from the track they are, you get to see, when you combine that with the impact on people, the gravity of the incident. Much the same occurred at 14th Street. There's similarities between 14th Street, but differences. Overspeed condition, very high overspeed condition, large physical damage, a large amount of physical trauma. I do not want to look at this incident in any other way other than the human impact to begin with, because I think that's where it needs to start. We then need to focus in terms of, because I can tell you at a personal level for me, you do a lot of soul searching in terms of what could you do to prevent a recurrence from happening, because you go back to the impact on human lives. You yourselves read those stories in the newspaper, and you would be hard-pressed to say it didn't affect you personally, because it certainly affected us. We've taken a number of actions, and we will continue to take actions. We will do so in concert with those investigative bodies who have the legislative authority and oversight to do so. But we will not wait for those actions to be completed. We will not shirk our responsibilities to do anything and everything we can do in advance of those reports being completed, because we have a responsibility to the public, to our employees, and the people in the region to assure them that we're operating safe systems. It's not a responsibility any of us take lightly. I'd like Howard to go through basically a factual summary. Do not want to hold off any questions. There are some that if they get into the area of conjecture or an ongoing investigation that the NTSB has asked us not to respond to, because they do want to make sure that they have the ability to have free and access open information. But please ask questions, because I'm sure you have a lot of them. And if I feel it's a point that'll either infringe upon that NTSB responsibility or an item that may be the result of a legal action that we need to have a discussion in executive session, we can do that most likely at the board meeting, not now. But in the interest of a free and open discussion, we will go through the summary and then have the discussion we need to have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom. Let me start by echoing Tom's remarks and just speak on behalf first of the Metro North and its employees, and to express our deepest condolences to the customers who were injured and to the families of the deceased during this really tragic event. As Tom mentioned, we were both there. We witnessed the work of the first responders as they rescued the injured and recovered those who died. And in my long career in public transit, this is something that is really new for me, and is something that I will always take with me and make sure that, more importantly, that the Metro North organization remembers it, so that we take whatever actions we can to ensure that these types of events do not happen. It's been taken very hard within the Metro North family. We understand the enormity of all of this. I think that that's something that's a good thing, in that we will do everything we can going forward to operate the railroad in absolutely the safest way that we can. With regard to the rest of the presentation, just so you know what I'm going to speak about, I'm going to talk a little bit about an overview of the event, then the emergency response, the investigative efforts, service restoration, and then, as Tom pointed out, all the actions that Metro North has been taking subsequent to that Sunday to make the railroad a safer place. And as Tom said, and I'll say up front, these are actions that we started that day. We are working with the FRA and the NTSB, but these are initiatives that we are taking, and wherever we get good advice in terms of how to do something better or different, we'll take it. But we are not going to wait for anybody to make these actions. With regard to the event, it occurred on Sunday, December 1st at approximately 7:20. Hudson Line train 8808 left Poughkeepsie at its regular scheduled time of 5:54 a.m., scheduled to arrive in Grand Central at 7:43. The train crew consisted of the engineer, the conductor, and 2 assistant conductors. The train made its last station stop at Tarrytown, which is milepost 25, which is about 14 miles north of Spuyten Duyvil Curve. There was no incident at the stop, and then the train started coming south. Spuyten Duyvil Curve, it's a 6-degree, 30-minute left-hand curve. The speed is limited to 30 miles an hour. The train derailed 368 feet into the curve on track number 2 at milepost 11.35, just north of Spuyten Duyvil Station. This area has 3 tracks. The train was on the middle track. It derailed and then also destroyed the track closest to the river. All 7 passenger coaches and the locomotive derailed. 4 of the 7 coaches and the locomotive were on their sides. 1 or more of the cars may have both tipped over and then rerighted themselves during the derailment activity. As a result of the derailment, 4 passengers were killed. 59 people were transported from the scene to local hospitals to be treated for injuries, 11 of which were critical. We had a very large and very fast emergency response from the New York City Fire Department, the New York City Police Department, MTA Police Department, Metro North Operations personnel, MTA and NYCT bus, and then representatives from the FRA, PTSB, and National Transportation Safety Board. By early afternoon, the National Transportation Safety Board sent the full team. They arrived on the site around 1:30 or so to lead the investigative efforts. So far, in reviewing their findings, they've had a series of press releases. What they have found in reviewing the event recorded data, they determined the engineer was operating the train at 82 miles an hour in a 30-mile-an-hour zone when it derailed. The investigation has found so far the rail cars and signal equipment were all working as intended and the track was in good condition. The members of the team are now in Washington and they're going to continue their investigation from there. As a point of reference, the parties to the investigation is Metro North, the Federal Railway Administration, New York Public Transportation Safety Board, Teamsters Local 808, the New York Police Department, the New York Fire Department, and Bombardier Transportation. Once right after the derailment, well, as I mentioned, let me stop a second, in that location, all 3 tracks were damaged due to the derailment. The middle track had significant damage where the train left from. The outer track was destroyed by the train. A total of 800 feet of track with associated signal and third rail power systems had to be replaced in this area. Until we could repair the tracks and the cars being re-railed and removed, there was no train service to Grand Central. So on Sunday, we operated with New York City Transit buses between Tarrytown Station on the Hudson Line and White Plains Station on the Harlem Line. We then brought in cranes and other special heavy equipment, which we leased and which got onto the scene around 5 or 6 o'clock Sunday night. And as soon as the NTSB authorized us to begin the recovery, then we started to re-rail the cars. All the derailed and damaged cars were re-railed and removed from the scene by 6 p.m. Monday. We then began to clear the debris and repair track, the signal power systems. All of that was done under NTSB review because they were still investigating. So we worked with NTSB as we were doing this. We also had a 900-gallon diesel fuel spill from the locomotive that was remediated at the site. On Monday and Tuesday, we ran train service between Poughkeepsie and Yonkers, and then MTA Bus provided a shuttle between Yonkers and the 242nd Street terminus of the subway. Westchester and Putnam counties and local municipalities helped us provide parking at 2 key stations, Southeast and Valhalla. On Wednesday, we had 1 track, the one least damaged, was back in service, and that day we ran, you may recall, 98% of the service. We were able to operate that day. On Thursday, we got the 2nd track back. Full service was resumed. When we rebuilt the track, we then inspected it with a Sperry rail car to make sure that there were no defects, and then we started running train service that Thursday. Finally, the 3rd track, the one that had the most damage, was repaired, tested, and returned to service on Sunday, December 8th. So as of right now, the right-of-way is back in the condition it was prior to December 1st. Most importantly, let me speak to the corrective actions that we have been taking subsequent to December 1st. We started literally that day identifying things that we needed to do. They were augmented in conversations with the FRA starting that day at the site and continuing over the past week and a half. And these conversations, I say, took place literally before Emergency Order 29, which came out on December 6th, before then, during then, and subsequent to them. The actions we are taking, let me list them so you have a complete picture of what they are. The first thing was to develop and implement a signal system modification at Spuyten-Duyvil curve to allow the cab signal system to enforce passenger speed limits automatically. That was done on last Monday, December 9th. We are now in the process of developing and implementing a similar signal system modifications at 4 remaining curves and 5 movable bridges. And let me point out that each location requires a different design change to the signal system to apply the civil speed restriction. So each one's a little bit different depending on the characteristics. We will, the four remaining critical curves, we'll have that done by March 1st. They will all be signaled with civil speed enforcement. The movable bridges will be completed by September 1st. These are the 5 movable bridges on the New Haven line in the state of Connecticut. Until these modifications are made, we're going to increase the communication between the engineer and another qualified employee at these locations. So remember, the train crew is going to remind the engineer either face-to-face, and if you're on a train, you'll see them walking up to talk to the engineer, or by radio, depending on the nature of the circumstance and the equipment they're running, they're approaching a critical curve or a movable bridge. In addition, we are posting speed limit signs at each critical curve location. Throughout, this does not in any way take away the responsibility for the engineer to know the operating speeds along their routes. That's their responsibility. That is that's their basic job requirement. These signs are reminders to the engineer speed reduction is coming. They will be up at the curves by close of business today. We are installing alerters in the 1/3 of the fleet that's not yet equipped with them. The alerters were, and just as to understand what has alerter and doesn't, the alerters were required to be put in all cars that were placed in service after September 2002 in accordance with the FRA regulation on equipment. So what we are now going to do, so 2/3 of our cars have them, the M7s have them, the M8s have them, and the locomotives have them. We will now retrofit the remainder of the fleet, which is the M3s and all the cab cars and the coaches. They will be retrofitted to have the alerters. We are also going to have an expanded speed compliance program that went into effect last Tuesday. We're going to be using both people and technology to make sure that our engineers are operating according to our rules and operating the trains at their MAS, which is the speed they should be operating. We've started our quarterly safety stand-down program. We did that last week. We had over 4,000 people in Metro North, part of the safety stand-down, and we're going to continue to do that. It's a way to definitely improve the communication with our employees to talk about safety, both from the management down as well as from the employees up. And it was very successful, and it's something we will continue to do. We're also going to participate in the FRA confidential close call reporting system. This is a program that's in place in a few railroads around the country. We will be joining that program. The FRA has also begun Operation Deep Dive at Metro North, and this is an intensive look at all elements of our operation by FRA inspectors and personnel from around the country, lending basically a fresh set of eyes to how we do our business. This is starting today. It will be completed in 60 days. And we've told FRA this and communicated it to them that we value their expertise and we will welcome any ideas they have on how we can further improve safety at Metro North. With that, Tom, I think turn it back to you.
I failed to say that not only was it fortuitous that I was there or a set of sequence of events, I was on the phone with the governor as I was standing on the Henry Hudson Bridge looking down at the Spuyten-Duyvil derailment. He arrived at the scene not much longer after I did, and he was there a greater part of the day. He took a keen interest in the actions we were taking, not only to deal with the injured, but also what we needed to do to restore service, but most importantly, what we could do to prevent a recurrence. He has sent me a directive making sure that I do that, and I would have done it anyway, but it was clear that he wanted to make sure that whatever actions we take at Metro North, to whatever degree or extent the applicability spills over to Long Island Railroad, we take those actions as well. Because while the specific details of the operation and the rules may slightly differ between the two railroads, the basic intent of ensuring safety of operations needs to be there. I've asked Carmen Bianco, he actually was up at the scene because he was delegated my authority that day, but I had actually arrived earlier, and to whatever degree we can learn from this incident and then also translate it across to New York City Transit, we will do so. One of the questions that has come up, and it came up even after the Bridgeport derailment, is to what extent would positive train control would have either prevented or significantly altered the occurrence of this incident. And clearly, positive train control, as legislatively defined, provides for enforcement of civil speed restrictions on curves. The primary purpose of a signal system has three elements. One is to prevent train collisions running into trains ahead of you. The second is to make sure that before you cross over and go to another route, the route is clear and there's no trains in the track. And the third is to provide overspeed protection. The third element actually was something that came into play far into the development of railroads. Signal protection for collision and collision avoidance and interlocking or route changing has been in existence for probably over 100 years. It was only actually in the mid of the 20th century that they started to provide overspeed protection for civil speed restrictions. And in fact, the Long Island Railroad may have been the first one to do it in 1950 after 2 very serious accidents. We have always embraced PTC. There are concerns with it, not funding. I've never been in this organization where funding was a limitation to doing anything. It certainly wasn't after Clark Street. We made a decision to put in a new control center so we could identify where the location of all the transit authority trains were, or the decision to go to communication-based train control to prevent occurrences like 14th Street. So funding's not an issue. We will deal with that. Issues with respect to the difficulties in implementing a new technology are certainly an issue, and technical issues like getting the spectrum from the FCC to be able to provide the communication medium to provide that. Those are not excuses, those are realities, those are challenges, but we will overcome them. In conversations with the governor at his direction, we have modified our RIF application for East Side Access to include in it about $1 billion so we can fund the Positive Train Control Initiative, and he has directed us to see what actions we can take to speed up its implementation. Speed up its implementation in a way where, although the legislatively mandated date of implementation is December 31st, 2015, and the industry at large is struggling with that, to see what we can do to meet that or come as close to it as possible. I'm going to make sure it's a priority of the organization. I did the same after Clark Street with the control center, and I did the same thing after 14th Street in concert with the president at the time and the MTA chairman at the time for communication-based train control. We're now open for discussion. Any questions you may have? Andrew?
Yeah, I guess this is for Howard. What type of dead man's control was present on the ill-fated train?
The train had as do all the equipment that didn't have alerters has a dead man control. The purpose being that if the person were to die or have a heart attack, the train would stop. It was a foot pedal, and he had to maintain pressure on the pedal. That's what's in the cab car.
So hypothetically, if somebody fell asleep or slumped over for one thing and their foot engaged the pedal, it wouldn't have done anything.
If they had sufficient pressure, Andrew, generally this is generally how the dead man's controls have worked throughout the railroad industry, and generally the feeling was that if someone were to become incapacitated, they would lose the pressure.
In the evolution of controls within the industry, that's one of the reasons why the alerter came in, but there were other reasons as well. The capacity of the person operating the train, making sure you could check that. But the dead man feature and the way Howard described it has been around for probably over 100 years.
The last thing, Howard, is you mentioned that you were going to put alerters on all of the equipment that doesn't presently have them. You didn't give a date by which that...
Oh, I'm sorry. We'll have that done by the end of the year. We're working on the work right now, talking about the design work. And I also want to be clear that we are not planning to put them on the M2s, 4s, and 6s because they'll be retired, because the M8s will be here by the end of the year.
Thank you.
Yeah, the end of the year, 2014.
Mr. Merdler?
Not 13. Yes.
Mr. Chairman, first I would like to thank you and congratulate you for opening up this meeting to public discussion as contrasted with doing it in executive session, which others might have wanted to do. You ought to be congratulated for assuring transparency. Secondly, permit me another observation. Both locally and nationally, Howard Permit and his organization have been hailed for the past few years for a perfectly superb job in delivering on-time, reliable, and robust service. He didn't cause this accident. He didn't do anything to in any way affect it adversely. And any criticisms that are heaped at this point, I think, are entirely unwarranted. And I personally would like to thank him for his service. I think it's the fair thing to do and the right thing to do. That said, Mr. Chairman, I would like to ask 2 questions, if I may. As I understand it from the federal government report, the ATC required recoding? Is that essentially it at these curves? And if so, where would the coding occur, in the field or at?
At the risk of getting into a lot of detail that may confuse, I believe they're using terms related to the cab signal system and how the wayside equipment along the track communicates with the onboard equipment. And they do it through a series of electrical pulses, and they use the term code. And what they were talking about, I believe, is the issue of how you could make a change to the existing cab signal system at Metro North at the Spuyten Duyvil curve and put in a level of enforcement for the civil speed restriction that existed there. It's something that was done after an accident up at the MBTA in Boston on Amtrak track, I believe in the early 90s. And it was the installation of a code specific to the cab signal system at Metro North that would enforce this 30-mile-an-hour speed restriction.
Tom, if I may, just add one point. At Spuyten Duyvil Curve, we were able to use, there's two interlockings, and Chuck, I know you're familiar with them, both one at Spuyten Duyvil, CP11 and CP12, and the curve happens to sit between them. By the nature of those two interlockings, we were using the signals that are at that interlocking location allowed us to make this change so rapidly. When I mentioned that other locations, it has to be site-specific, that's because we don't have that same condition at these other four curves and at the 5 movable bridges. So we will, as Tom points out, we will modify the signal system in a different way at those locations. We are working right now on figuring out the best way to do that from a design standpoint.
Are there any
I'd just like to elaborate. I mean, it sounds simple in some ways, but having, I've been very close to signals for a lot of my career, and these design solutions are ones that really need to be thought through because you want to bring the speed of the train down slowly and not abruptly.
May I ask whether there are any other places, or whether we have examined whether there are any other places where these kind of design changes, or recoding, if you will, is appropriate or might be appropriate?
Yeah. What the first thing we did after that Sunday is we surveyed the whole system, Chuck, to identify where we had a potential concern on curves. We identified those curves. We've completed that survey. That's how we have the 4 curves east of Hudson. And the bridges got added because they're a natural concern. If a movable bridge is not properly, in the right position, you obviously have a potential danger there as well.
Early on in that process, Helene came in with her people, and we made sure we had an alignment and a discussion on the criteria to be used for the identification of these locations. And Long Island Railroad is using that same identification to identify the curves primarily, but not all curves, where these type of speed enforcement technical solutions need to be implemented.
And I would add, Tom, under that criteria, we identified 7 locations, and we will, follow the same strategy of enforcing those restrictions in our cab signaling system.
Where are those locations?
I can tell you that we have locations in Hicksville, 2 in Hicksville, 5. Hicksville to Huntington, 5 locations, 1 on the Atlantic branch by Hall Tower, and 1 in the adjacent to the advance of Syosset Station. And we are moving forward to put in the civil speed restriction. As Howard said, we need to develop a design, but we will move with all speed to get that done. And we, in the meantime, have reduced speeds to ensure that there isn't a differential greater than 20 miles per hour. And we are also adding the posted signs at those locations.
If you will permit me 2 points. One, you mentioned the first responders. I would be grossly unfair. I was with you when you were doing this. If I were not to mention that 13 of the people who were injured were transported by the Volunteer Ambulance Corps of Hatzola, which was there from the very beginning and through the very end. The second and last point is this. You have mentioned and we have seen videos of the sign erection along the lines showing speed restrictions. Sensor technology has gotten very, very sophisticated. Would there be a useful purpose served in considering the possibility of, alongside those signs, putting some form of sensor which would put a light bulb to go on in the cab or the like, so that people could see it? Signs are not always easy to read, especially from a fast-moving train at night.
We'd look at any solution. One of the things we do want to make sure we don't lose sight of is the book of rules, the knowledge of physical characteristics, and the responsibilities that a locomotive engineer has are something that are ingrained in railroads for over 100 years. We've made improvements to them. We certainly don't want to be hog-tied by structure or past behaviors, and we want to take advantage of new ones. We don't want to dismiss those that are good. The issue of ensuring that a locomotive engineer is looking out at the track and looking out at any and all features he or she should be looking at, and a sign is one of them, is one that we think is positive to take. But we would look at something like that, Chuck. We certainly would.
Let me just make the point. I do not mean to gainsay your unquestioned expertise in the field or your desire to get it done right. Engineers are human beings, and that's why they put erasers on pencils, because they, like the pencil, make a mistake. And it seems to me that if we use sensor technology or take a look at it or some other technology to help them, it would be a positive thing. It may not be practical. All I ask is that you take a look at it.
Mr. Kay?
The positive train control, that's Congress legislative required by the end of 2015 to
Yes,
have it?
that's
How
correct.
long ago was that?
2009, I believe, was or 2008 was the original legislation.
And what's the cost estimate of actually having to do that in its entirety?
For us, order of magnitude $1 billion. I think the last actual estimate was between 750 to 850. We've asked for in the RIF application $1 billion to see if we can do it in a faster way. We want to make sure we have more than enough money, but order of magnitude, it's 850 to $1 billion.
And what have we done up until this point since 2008 to 2013?
We brought to the board a contract last month for the integration, but a lot of work has been done in advance of that. Helena or Howard, do you want to take that on?
I'll speak on ours first, Jeff. So and this covers, we in Long Island together bought Spectrum. So that was a major effort that has covered the Long Island. It covers about half of Metro North. So we have half of what we need, 100% what Long Island Railroad needs. We have also started to install the PTC on the rolling stock. So that program started about 6 months ago. That's a very long lead time item as you put it in, piece of rolling stock by rolling stock. So we've done that. We have been doing preliminary through conceptual design work, which in essence led up to the integrator contract that was approved. So we've been working on that. We've defined pilots. There's a very specific federally mandated process for PTC, and we've defined the pilots on Metro North where we're going to test this out, one on the New Haven, one on the Hudson line. And those are off the top of my head the major accomplishments.
And I would add that we began immediately in 2009 retaining expertise to help us develop what is known as the system specification. Simultaneously, both railroads filed their implementation plans with the FRA. We both received approvals on the plans we filed. We've identified on Long Island Railroad, some of the areas that are, require exemptions. We have worked hard to make sure we had a very solid specification out there. We put the specification out through an RFP process. I am very pleased to say last month the contract was awarded based on that specification to a joint venture. The contract was for Long Island Railroad, $218 million, for Metro North, $210 million, and it will design, integrate, furnish positive train control systems necessary for us to comply with the law. It's an enormous effort, and we while we were doing all of this, working on the Spectrum strategy as well, we have all but a small piece that we still need for Metro North, and while we continue to work on that, in terms of the open market where you try to purchase it, we've also asked the FCC for assistance in allocating Spectrum.
I'm sorry, do you have a follow-up, Jeff, or
I have
no?
a couple, but if
Yeah.
anyone
Okay,
wants
no,
to-
no, no.
So we've known for some time that we weren't going to make this deadline. I mean, we've talked about it in capital budget discussions. I think we've actually added additional money at one point, maybe outside of the normal piece. I can't vaguely remember that. My assumption is we've had plenty of conversations with the federal government that we were not able to comply, but my assumption is we've done some things to show them that we were moving in that direction, and that potentially there were some stopgap items that we've done prior to the accident rather than from the accident now. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, the industry at large has talked about the difficulties associated with meeting the deadline. Some of them even talk about the financing application of it, but we don't. We're talking primarily about the technical issues and the spectrum issues. And the issue that you can actually have people buy spectrum that are speculators that really don't have an intended use for it other than holding it to the highest bidder. And that is a real challenge. We will overcome that by whatever means we need to overcome that. But we have been constantly moving the ball up the field in terms of trying to get PTC implemented. And there has been a dialogue with both the FRA and others with respect to difficulties in meeting it.
And then the RIF application, the governor's directed you to incorporate.
That was
up to $1
submitted.
billion.
That was submitted last week. It was submitted last week.
And what sort of reaction?
It was received very well. The RIF application is entertained by the FRA administrator, Joe Zabo. I've had a conversation with him. He received it well. I've had a conversation with the Deputy Secretary, John Porcari. Received very well. I think we're all aligned in the sense that it's the right thing to do.
Wait, Jeff, could I supplement your specific question, possibly? To save time, it was received well, but the lawyers assured us that amending the RIF application will not slow it down pursuant to some regulation that we don't.
In the conversations we've seen, we see no reason why it would be slowed down. The reason why he put it in that application, John, was to make sure that we would take advantage of all the evaluations that had been ongoing for the existing RIF loan, especially those related to credit and financing and the solvency of the MTA, rather than start that process over. So it was decided jointly that it would probably be the best way to go forward to move it aggressively forward.
I think it's a great idea, but there are many regs applicable to each specific program, and it would be a shame if there's some reg that ends up, instead of just duplicating and submitting a new application, that, look, I'll leave it.
We'll sort that issue very early.
Okay. Then the other couple things, you said you'd explore every means of getting this spectrum. That's one of the concerns we've had. Is there a way we could possibly work with government to condemn the spectrum? Use eminent domain to get the spectrum for safety
That would certainly
concerns?
be one of the options. The fact that we've had this incident, we'll use it as a means to try to indicate to other people the importance of getting the spectrum. And I'm sure whatever path we follow, others across the industry can use it as well, because they may be having similar problems.
Well, I don't know if something like spectrum has ever been the subject of eminent domain, but I would encourage you, if the private industry is holding you up, then
I would say that we believe that there is adequate spectrum that the FCC is holding, and we've actually petitioned the FCC to allocate that spectrum to us. To date, they have not done that. They have said go out on the open market and purchase it.
Then the last thing relating to what you said, you mentioned the word exemptions, Helena. What would be exempt? Which portions of our system, or what would constitute reasons for exemptions from the PTC?
Long Island Railroad system has what is known as dark territory, where we have no signalization, no track circuits. And we filed in our plan with the FRA a plan to do what's known as temporal separation, where we will not allow a passenger train to be on the track at the same time a freight train is on the track. And that affects Ronkonkoma to Greenport.
We're going to reevaluate that. I mean, in light of this incident, we need to make sure that any piece of track that Long Island Railroad operates on, or Metro North, has the requisite protection that our customers expect, and we need to ensure.
Thank you. Jeff, I cut in.
Question.
Thanks.
You had made a statement before that you said we've moved the ball up the field, so to speak. I know this is a huge puzzle, and you're trying to put all the pieces together, but how far up the field do you think we've moved it? I mean, are we to the 50-yard line with this thing? Because they're different, the permitting process, and there's the actual installation of it, there's many, many facets.
I think when you have an incident like this, I go back to my opening comments about soul searching. From the time I entered the Transit Authority in 1982, actually long preceding that, there was a need for a control center. There's 540 trains in the system. We didn't know where they were, only 20% of the system. It took the accident at Clark Street and failure of being able to identify a train in a heavy smoke condition to solidify a lot of people around the idea to build a control center that now exists at 54th Street. So one incident just galvanized a lot of people's thinking, and it was accelerated. The same thing with communication-based train control for 14th Street. Before that, the Transit Authority struggled forever. So in answer to your question, yes, we were moving the ball up the field. Yes, we were making progress. But I think in light of what happened and part of that soul searching, we need to advance it, and we need to try to do as best we can to meet that deadline of end of 2015.
And it looks feasible.
2015 is very difficult given the issues. We can't just, the issues we have identified as challenges haven't changed overnight. They will be difficult, but we're going to keep the pressure on the organization, because the other issue too is how much can we get in by 2015? So that's the issue. That's the way we're looking at it.
And we've been dealing with this for years, and now we're talking about 12 months.
No,
It'd be 24
the end of
months.
2015.
2015,
End of
yes.
15,
Yes.
24
I just
months.
wanted to recapture the direction that you had given Howard and myself. We were asked, by the chair to examine the PTC schedule and do everything we can to develop an acceleration plan, and we're supposed to report back to you, I think, in the January CPAC. So we will be working hard to look at that schedule and have a better assessment of where we would be. We were on record with the FRA that we, when we filed an update to our plan in April, both of us, that we felt it would be difficult to meet the 2015 deadline.
And part of that dialogue requires the input of the person or the group that is actually going to do the work for us, the knowledgeable signal people. And the other thing I'll come back to is that there's going to be a balance between moving the schedule up forward aggressively to get the controls and protection in place, but at the same time not doing so at the risk of reliability. Because indelibly marked in my mind were previous incidents in my career where I worked in an organization that was done, and they had two very serious incidents within the first 4 years they put a system in. So we need to have a balance between that which we can do as aggressively as possible, but doing it in a way that doesn't throw aside reliability. Mr.
Thank you, Tom. This is really a clear example of how regulations are written in blood. And all the instances you stated from the Long Island Railroad tragedy, what was it, Richmond Hill, early 50s?
Richmond Hill and Kew Gardens, 1950.
Yeah, and then, of course, 14th Street and on through the California wreck and into this one. It seems to be the only way you write regulations. There's, and I know you're not part of the general deregulatory juggernaut in transportation and government. Nonetheless, and you also said that finance was not a question here. However, each one of these new regulations, when they come in, there's a time element it takes, intellectual capital element. You have to pull the resources together to create these new systems that are caused by the new regulatory environment. But nonetheless, do you feel that there were choices made? I know that you don't want to look in the rearview mirror too much here, but were there choices made before, and are there choices you will have to make in the next couple of years that will force you to choose between expanding ASC to greater territories on both railroads and fully implementing the PTC under the requirements, under the limits that are set by the government?
Norman, with the incident that occurred, it has forced us to go to a different place. I mean, even after 14th Street, we implemented some actions immediately. They used to align routes in advance of the train coming down on the location. We changed that policy and procedure then. We actually instituted a call-on aspect to force all trains to come to a stop before they went through a crossover. There was a train that went through a crossover designed at 8 miles an hour, went through at 52. took down 33 columns, killed 5 people, and injured 200. So going forward, we did things differently, and I'm sure the same will occur here, because we've now had an occurrence that didn't exist before, and it's indelibly marked in our mind. So we are going to be different. And so when I make statements about, I do a certain amount of looking back, like what could have been done different, but the overwhelming majority of what I apply and the organization does is looking forward to make changes. Mr. Murdler?
Chairman, I have a question for you and for both of the agency heads. Many of us, myself included, have focused extensively on trying to get trains, subways, buses, and the like to get to a point, to a destination as quickly as possible and as efficiently as possible. And in that endeavor to stimulate speed and performance, I assume that you have taken steps and will take steps to make sure that speed is not put as a priority over safety, and that safety should come first. Am I correct?
Absolutely. We have to reinforce that every day.
Second part. 2 United States senators, one from Connecticut and one from New York, have been very vocal over the past few days, particularly on every radio station they can find. And my question is, to what extent have either or both of them been helpful in terms of providing either radio spectrum or providing assistance with PTC or the like, or indeed providing funding for any of these activities?
I can't and I won't at this time go into all the detail, but both of those centers are very supportive in terms of getting whatever funding is needed to be able to make whatever improvements. There have been discussions with Senator Schumer and Senator Blumenthal, some cases collectively, some cases individually, and their concern is the same as ours, which is what do we need to do to get the funding necessary to have technical solutions to these problems and things we may need to deal with.
And the last, if I may please, on the push trains, as I read some of the reports, and I might add, if I may, Mr. Chairman, most of the board members, if not all of them, probably saw the FRA and other reports first when we received a copy from Commissioner Brown. And the quest is, in the future, if we can get those kind of reports as they come out, if they are forwarded automatically to the board members.
We will do that. I mean, I think we've gotten better, but we can certainly improve it. I mean, one of the things I do feel badly about is that I would like to get this information in the hands of the board as soon as possible, especially the factual information, so that you're up to speed. Because in some cases, you're asked questions, we don't want to put you in a position where you can't at least respond at a factual level. So I've taken that charge to do that.
One of the articles written, I believe, in the New York Times, there was a reference to the fact that in California, where you have the push trains, the passenger car in which the locomotion, if you will, is provided, are only allowed to be occupied toward the rear of that car. Is that something we have looked at?
I don't believe that's a requirement. There were a series of accidents back in 1995, one at Secaucus and one at Silver Spring. And Emergency Order 20 at the time contemplated that, but it did not require that. I think some entities have done that. If you ride across the region, any one of the MU equipment operations we have in this region, whether it's New Jersey Transit, New York City Transit, Long Island Railroad, or Metro North, there are people in the head car, the head half of the head car, and we've had a very safe and reliable operation for years. So it is not a requirement, and it's not something we contemplate at this time.
Yeah. It's interesting you mentioned the incident at Union Square, because I remember that too, and I remember you were at Transit then, and also the similarity between the incidents is, well, it's about a signal system that didn't do the protection, at least I thought that they had. I know Long Island, and I thought that Long Island actually had speed control in the whole system, but that's one of the questions I have. Is that not the case? It's just in certain areas, certain
There are 9
curves?
curves, I believe, that are currently covered. Helena?
In the electrified territory, we have 9 curves that are civil restrictions that are already included in the automatic speed control. We have other territories where we operate diesel equipment, where we have both dark territory and we have segments that are automatic block signal that has some track circuits but no automatic speed control.
But would it be fair to say most of the Long Island system actually does not have speed control, just areas where there are low speed restrictions?
No.
Or if there's a...
I'm sorry, let me say that again.
Yeah.
The entire electrified service has speed control.
And it was the entire Babylon branch. If I'm an engineer and I go over speed on Babylon, even though it's straight, I'll get an alarm that'll alert me to say I'm going over speed and I should slow down.
Well, we have, yes, you would.
Okay.
And we have an automatic enforcement where the code will drop automatically if the engineer doesn't take action.
Okay, I just want to make sure that
one of the
that's
things
clear.
I want to emphasize, as much as I thought I knew things about the New York City Transit Authority at the time of 14th Street, there were some enlightening moments.
Yeah,
I have to say this, and a lot of times people get upset when we say we need for an investigation to get done, and if that's been done only for the purpose that people to do it because they want to put off difficult questions, that's one thing. But if it needs to be done so that we can ascertain exactly what exists and what needs to be done and we need to do that, because before I'm going to make any profound statements about what currently exists at both railroads, and I don't want to put the railroad presidents in that position either, we need to sort through, especially when some have been around for 40 years and somebody asks how did it get there, and there's no trace on paper as to how it got there. So I do want to give some time, and the NTSB will turn over every issue and make sure they get to an exhaustive conclusion.
Okay, I appreciate that very much, because it's questions that people are asking and impressions that I had about both systems. So I know Metro North, I believe Metro North's cab signal is actually a newer system than Long Island, but no, I understand.
Yes.
I'm explaining why I have the impression I have, and I understand, Tom, perfectly what you're saying, that there has to be a full investigation to see what can be done. And I think Commissioner Brown, that was my sentiment too. Are we waiting for something with positive train control, and were we doing that? And I don't.
No, we're not waiting. I mean, if there are things we find on our own, or the investigation turns over, we will deal with them.
Let's say in regards to employees, we want to give them the feedback that they need to make sure things like this don't happen. The other thing is also, I can't say enough, that's the kind of redundancy and safety we need. And I felt after seeing this that maybe there was some redundancy. In other words, you can't just rely on the engineer. We rely on him, but he needs to have some safety measures, some alerts and things like that. And
it's actually a two-way street. There are some systems that have put in terms of audio and visual alarms that have got to the point where the person operating the train has had a Pavlovian response. And they're responding to something that's a command, but they're not necessarily understanding the nature of the hazard with respect it's telling them about.
Right.
So when you design signal systems, you integrate it with the book of rules. I cannot emphasize strongly enough the fact that needs to be done in an integral way.
Yeah, no, the interaction between the person and the technology needs to be well thought out, and it needs to be looked at again, because I think we should do that on an ongoing basis. And I wonder if we, people become complacent. That's the nature of everything, and we need to. I think we should have an ongoing review of that.
Thank you, Tom. I want to sort of break this into two pieces if I can. First of all, just a couple of factual issues. Can you, Howard, comment on the newspaper accounts about the headlight flashing or lowering that either did or did not occur on the train in question, just as a systematic matter? Is there in fact a system in place which says that when that trains are supposed to flash each other as they cross? And following up on that is what is a person, in this case in the northbound train, supposed to do with that information?
First, with respect to this specific, what did or did not happen is covered by the NTSB.
Understand.
So that's I can't comment on that. That's part of the investigation. I think, are you asking, Jim?
Is there a system in place?
It would be in the book of rules what is supposed to be done.
Or in practice, I don't know which.
Practice? John, can you just explain what's required?
Yes, what's in our book of rules deals with an engineer from an oncoming train actually blinding the other engineer during times of darkness. So our book of rules does require during reduced lighting conditions for both engineers to basically place their headlights on dim such that they don't blind the oncoming engineer.
So, in a sense, in essence, the rule is covering that specific situation as opposed to being in a sense, a safety rule for the engineers.
Yes, the dimming of the lights is simply to reduce visual blindness for passing trains. It's not
That in and of itself is a
safety.
safety rule. That in and of itself is a safety rule. But not necessarily for anything else.
Right. Okay. Second, and these are kind of one-offs. Could you comment on the checks that the railroad does to make sure that engineers are abiding by the rules in terms of things like radar checks, in terms of and also comment on how the discipline works for personnel if they're found to be in violation of the rules.
So we have what we call efficiency checks, which are basically where people are observing engineers as well as other employees. This is generally under the FRA efficiency test and the different rules, that people are doing their jobs and people are checking that. It's one of the things that when we went back, and I spoke to this before, one of the things we have done, we started last Tuesday, was enhancing that program. The program consists, it's a variety of things, of people checking, it's visual inspection, it's radar, and it's also done through technology by using the event recorders that are in the trains. We can download them. And one of the things that we will be doing, we're enhancing that program, particularly focusing on the use of the event recorders to make sure that the engineers are operating in compliance with the speeds and the rules. There was a second part, I'm sorry, I forgot. Jim, did that answer you, or did you have another?
How the disciplinary system works.
Yeah, we have a progressive disciplinary, it's hard to say, process, depending on what the violation is. The largest with respect to engineers, and I believe it's 10 miles an hour over the MAS, the FRA, it's called the decertification, and if you lose your license to operate for 30 days, and then it becomes progressive. If it happens a second time, you move further, stricter discipline.
And you feel that that's adequate?
We are always looking to improve the discipline process. I think right now, the critical element is enhancing our compliance program so that people are operating and all our engineers understand the speeds they should be operating on. I think in the last week, that message has gotten out. I think we're doing a better job than we were a week ago. But that's basically, that's the program we're going to focus on.
In 14th Street, I keep going back to that because there are some similarities. The train operator that was involved went through the first station without stopping, put half the train out of the station in the second station, and the conductor didn't take them out of service. And the conductor's in charge of the train. There are a whole host of issues with respect to what we did in terms of reinforcing the importance of those particular rules and actions that should be taken, as well as additional ride checks for efficiency, unannounced ride checks with people who aren't in uniform to make sure that train operators, in this case engineers, would be doing. I would expect we would possibly contemplate those or implement those as we move forward. I'm sorry, Jim. I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead, Jim. Finish up. Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Thank you. In a kind of a summation, for myself at least, I first of all want to associate myself with Chuck's comments about the general operation of this railroad, the history of the great success that it has been over the years. And I think I speak for the board in that regard. And so there's not but we are looking for good future answers about the future behavior that will make this a thing of the past permanently. In my view, the number of events this year has kind of ticked off the issue of a culture issue within the railroad when it comes to operational safety. Safety, at least as I perceived it here on the board, through the safety reports, has been viewed in terms of on-the-job injuries, the push there is for our employees to work safe. Work safe meaning, don't hurt yourself on the job. In the case of passengers, which of course is my particular concern, safety has sort of translated into slip, trip, and fall, and icy platforms and that sort of thing. And we've sort of always assumed that operational safety is just there. We don't need to look into that. And I think from an operational standpoint, from a competency standpoint, that's a fair thing to do. Those things have to be done by the railroad itself. Monday morning quarterbacking and throwing out simplistic solutions or suggestions can be unhelpful. It is certainly a risky business. But I'd like to be assured that there is a culture existing now which encourages the examination of operational safety within the railroad all the time. And it's not just a matter of asking and answering simple questions, but for people to be asked systematically, how can we make things better, and also to bring in outside views on our operation. It can only help, and as we can see here, it is vitally important that this be done for the safety of riders and also employees and certainly for the reputation of this great railroad.
I'd like to answer that because safety culture is something that I am a firm believer in. It's necessary and it's important. 10 years of my career was spent in safety. Much of Carmen Bianco's career was spent in safety. We had a terrible problem, actually the third time around over a 10-year period, of employees and signals at New York City Transit falsifying records. And we had conflicts. We met with the people who were actually where the rubber hits the road or the wheel hits the rail. And they'd ask us questions like, what do you want, safety, productivity, or on-time performance? And we said, you've got it wrong. And if we need to send a message, you got it wrong, then we'll send that message. You need to get all three, but if you can only have one, it's got to be safety. The issue of safety culture is something that has to start from the top, but it also has to emanate from the bottom. There has to be clear direction from starting with my position that it's a requirement. It has to be met in kind with an ability for the people who are closest to where these hazards occur that they can take the appropriate action. Ann Kirsch is a safety officer and she sees a lot, but actually the safety of the railroad at Metro North is in the hands of each and every employee. I can assure you that day there were people out there that were examining their own actions in terms of what they could done, and that's throughout Metro North's culture. I mean, you felt it, you could see it when they were talking, and they felt the loss and the remorse in terms of the people that were injured. We've got a safety culture contract that at least two of the agencies are already availing themselves of, and Metro North and Long Island will. We're looking at this issue called Operation Deep Dive by the FRA. It's the first time ever that they've done this. They're bringing people in from all over the regions, and they literally want to go to that cultural issue. They're going to examine the system safety program plans. They're going to examine the responsibilities and duties of all the employees, and they're going to talk to people, and we're going to utilize that feedback because sometimes what we hear as senior management may not be what is coming out of the other people, and we want to use those evidence to do that.
If I might just add specifically two other things, that since last May, we've been using TTCI. They have looked at the issues of culture for us. They have identified places where we've made changes, particularly in the track department. And then Tom also has brought on the Blue Ribbon panel. and they are also looking at the whole issue of culture as well. They spent a day with Metro North and the senior management, I would say about 2-3 weeks ago, and we're waiting to see what they come up with. They've given us some preliminary feedback, and it's things that we are working on to integrate into the organization.
I think that that when you bring up the TTCI, it is indicative of the kind of the mindset that I at least would like to see going forward, in that that resource was out there for a long time, and we basically didn't get there until we found that we had some track problems, but to keep our eyes open for all the available resources that will help us both operate better and safer.
I just wanted to, it's clear to me after listening to this very informative discussion that one thing is clear from a factual standpoint, taking conjecture and assumptions out, and that is for a variety of reasons, whether they are regulatory, geographic, technology, whatever, parts of our system are safer or have more redundancy than other parts of our system do. And that we do not have the same safety features on every car, in every place, on every system. That's clear from the discussion. That's unfortunate, obviously, but it's clear that, and it's also clear that there are a variety of reasons why that has happened over a period of time. The question is, I guess now, what can we do collectively to modify that in a variety of ways, and there may be different ways on different systems in different places, to ensure that all of the system has the same level of safety and redundancy. It's clear at the moment that is not true. Not that it's not a fault issue, it's just a factual issue that parts of the system are safer than others. And the question is, how can we make all of the system as safe as possible, and what do we need to do to make that happen?
It's a very good point, Mitch, and what we try to do, even going back to the regulation that specified alerters on trains, the FRA felt strongly that prospectively going forward, all equipment needed to be outfitted with it, but not so strong to retrofit. We're going back and looking to what extent we need to retrofit, but also take into consideration how many more useful years of life do we have in that pieces of equipment. Because if we retrofit it and then retire it the next year, it may not be a wise expenditure of dollars from a safety standpoint. But you're absolutely right. And when we have incidents like this, it forces that look back in terms of what we need to do.
With respect, I mean, how do you square that with safety first, using your own analogy from the prior discussion?
It's similar to the issue when we looked back at 14th Street when we said we were going to have a call-on. It was very clear that we had a case after millions of train movements at 14th Street, if not billions, over $1 billion, that we had a train operator go through a crossover at 52 miles an hour. And it was very easy at that point to say, we're going to put a call-on aspect, we're going to stop every train, and we're not going to line the route. And that's difficult. It's a very difficult. Like, how did we let that happen? How did we have, it happened in 1991, so it was 91 years of service without an undesired event. But going forward, we're going to do anything and everything we can to make the system as safe as possible.
We're in the midst of many evaluations about our safety systems, not only at Metro North, but in our other properties as well. If I could make a request, I think it would be helpful to the board if, following the results of all these, we see the action plan for bringing our system back to a more level, safe condition, and that we see also the action plan that will get us to that point. Perhaps, I'm not sure what the timing would be, but perhaps that would be a good thing for you to agree to do for us.
We'll do that. I mean, I considered that to be a requirement to respond to the governor's directive to me, at least in terms of the two railroads. The fact that I've asked Carmen to be part of these activities, because to the degree it will spill over, or it will apply to New York City Transit, we would do that, but I will make that commitment, Susan. And did you have a question?
I just wanted to suggest that we may say that cost never prohibits our effort to achieve safety, but at the same time, all of our spending is, in a sense, monetized by other agencies and the legislature. So as part of that action plan, I think it would be helpful to specifically designate those resources that are going to have to be used to promote safety in this regard, so it's clear to everybody exactly what safety actually costs. It would not be fair to be critical of us or anyone else who's trying to achieve safety.
I agree, Governor, and when we put together our operating budgets and we're actually getting down to our last dollar, just about, and capital budgets, we almost always characterize those, we do characterize those things that are safety that are absolutes. Mr. Merdler?
Permit me a footnote to Governor Patterson's sound suggestion, and that is we have in all of these books that are distributed and reviewed a safety report, both here and in transit. May I respectfully suggest that from now on, that safety report go beyond the fires, go beyond the employee injuries, but address specifically what safety concerns there are in the rails, what safety concerns there are in personnel and the like, and perhaps even consider having a full-time safety officer who is technically proficient to do that in each of the agencies or at the MTA. It seems to me it's wonderful to know that there have been X number of fires and that people do a great job and it focuses issues. But it is now quite clear to me, at least, and it was to the governor, Governor Patterson, and to Jim Blair, that we need to broaden safety. Safety is safety when you're riding. It's, will a passenger get hurt more if the train comes to a stop and he's standing or if he's sitting? We need to look at those things.
I couldn't agree more, and as someone who actually set up the first system safety department in New York City Transit, Karma took it to another level, and Cheryl's taken it to the level that exists right now, Cheryl Kennedy, I can tell you far more goes into the management of a safety function within an agency than just reporting on slips, trips, falls, and fires. But the issue also of to what degree there is an entity at MTA headquarters that has responsibility for safety has waxed and waned over the years. And I'm examining that issue from a governance standpoint. But whatever needs to be done, we cannot take away the accountability from the agency head and the agency specifically responsible for delivering the service, because that's the most important place it needs to reside. Andrew?
Pursuant to the placement of alerters in engineers' cabs that are being pushed, what, and besides the fact that we will have a second employee in the engineer's cab if the speed limit changes by 20 miles per hour or greater, what is being done to ensure that, for instance, an engineer is okay, is alert? Are we attempting to change where the dead man control is on some of these cars, or are these cars ready for retirement too soon? I mean, what's being done to make sure an engineer is okay and alert?
There's a whole host of things that exist in the book of rules right now in terms of when they report for duty, what they do, how the conductor is responsible for the train, what he or she needs to do. In the instant case following this incident, what we've committed to do is that on MU equipment where the conductor can walk up, or another person that's rules qualified can walk up to the cab and ascertain that at those locations they're in charge of the train, they're fully control of their capabilities, and they take the right action, that's going to happen. Where there's an inability to do that, there's a radio requirement to do that. And we will do that, and I would expect that to continue until we implement positive train control and assure through equipment means.
If I clarify one point, the requirement as the plan we have, which is FRA is designated in compliance, does not require people in the cabs or the communication Tom laid out for 20-mile-an-hour changes. It's required only at these critical locations, which are the curves and the bridges. And the requirement that we have, and so basically that's the requirement, and that's when you see people walking up or talking on the radio.
That's the story?
Just a suggestion, as a certified conductor on Long Island, and I've spent 8 of my 18 years in the training department on Long Island, I think that it would be a tremendous advantage to the board if they could possibly get some type of, just a basic skills type of class that they can option to take to see how qualified, the extensive rules, layers of protection, the speed control packages, how everything ties together. Because I have no doubt that both railroads are safer today than they were yesterday. We run very safe operations. There are layers of rules. We're taking steps to make improvements. But, and we just spoke of this briefly, even in our dark territory, that's where the alertness of our employees, step it up. There's a manual block signal system in place. Everybody gears up. You rely on technology. Sometimes you take it for granted, but it works and it's fail-safe. And you know what? If anything, the technology slows us down at times because we have layers of rules that tell us how to operate when the technology fails. I think it would be a tremendous advantage if, a very basic type of operational course for the board members that can tie all these rules together and to see what we go through and the extensive amount of paperwork and the books and manuals that we have so they can relate to how safe we really are.
I think that's an excellent point. We can certainly do it without them having to go through the full training because it would take too long. But no, it's a good point because we could just pull out things that reinforce what that physical characteristics portion, for example, this is a very difficult test. There are a lot of people that fail it before they pass it. And I think Vinny makes a very good comment with respect to we've got to avoid the danger of taking things out of context and not looking at the system as a whole. But all the comments today are ones that we're going to take into consideration. Wrap it up, Jonathan.
Thank you, Tom. I jumped in at the beginning of this to try and have an efficiency of the questioning so that my questions related to Mr. K. So thanks for allowing me to jump in. But when I did so, I neglected to thank both you and Howard for the sensitivity of your remarks and your leadership throughout this crisis. But I have 2 questions in particular. I guess I look forward to more formal updates on PTC and the difficulties and solutions. But in the interim, there seem to have been a couple of changes to the operations and improvements that have come down from the federal regulators and other government officials. And I have 2 questions with respect to them. Just a quick one on the hotline that was discussed. Will general statistics relating to the usage of the hotline be available to you or to us or to the public? How many calls have been made, whether they led to any disciplinary actions without any specificity, but just to understand how often that will be being used? That's question 1.
The confidential close call reporting system that we're going to follow and the FRA has recommended is not a requirement under regulation is modeled after the Federal Aviation Administration similar program. And we could get you the details with respect to how often they report on those statistics, what the findings are, and in most cases it's non-punitive. There may be some examples where it could be punitive in terms of somebody doing self-incriminating, but the underlying belief is if you get people to report on issues, you can identify close calls and then head them off. But we can get you the specifics.
Well, I think it would be interesting to know, particularly as it's implemented, the usage. And the second is, as the proposed interim changes with respect to additional personnel responsibilities, particularly on curves with respect to speeds, the second person on the train, I think that those suggestions in the interim while PTC is being implemented sound helpful. But I'm not an operations specialist, and I just want to make sure that it's not the regulators or non-professional government officials who are setting up the rules, and that in fact the rules are being set up by professionals with the safety in mind, particularly with respect to 2 people on the train having responsibilities. It would be a true catastrophe if there was uncertainty with respect to the delineation of responsibilities now that there's 2 people instead of 1 person, just for example.
in the spirit of the cooperation that we have with the FRA, and in this particular effort, first of all, they have experienced people. They have people who come from the railroad industry that worked in these organizations, represented labor, and in the exchange we had with them in the weekend after the December 1st incident, there was a discussion about having people. As a matter of fact, the original draft, the emergency order, insisted on having another qualified rules qualified person in the cab. In order for us to basically identify people with that qualification, we would have had to strip people out of existing work crews such that we couldn't run trains. And so that was a very healthy dialogue. They realized right away that although the intent was good, the end result was not good. So we got to a place where the rule was. And that's part of the exchange. I consider, I'm looking at going forward with the deep dive, we'll have a similar type dialogue. But we do not wait for those actions to come from them before we take action. And irrespective of what we say, it's very clear. I started off, I'm accountable for all the operations and all the agencies as the agency heads are at their own agencies, and that's the way we treat them.
With respect to that specific point, the 2 people now instead of 1, it'll be clear at the outset the responsibilities of the second person, because there's plenty of literature on this topic. The more people involved with some task, it's not necessarily redundancy, it could be causing confusion.
Well, first of all, there's the issue of fraternization, them talking and not paying attention to their duties. The second issue of who has control of the train as it's being operated, and who has ultimate control in the event that the engineer is not doing it. But those have been established in the past, and they've been acted on. I'm sure Mr. Tessitore could tell you that they're pretty well known and understood. But we do have to make it absolutely clear, crystal clear.
If I may, on that, so to implement this particular action, we wrote a new rule that clearly specifies responsibility, who has to do what when the person goes up to the cab or speaking on the radio.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm sure we'll have a continued dialogue. I'm sorry, Governor.
Mr. Chairman, I can't leave this room without commenting generally on the tragedies of history and the mandated investigations that they ignite, the publicity they generate, and I guess the stress that they cause all of the people in leadership who are trying to address it, from the initial emergency services that were designed to try to save lives to the analysis that will continue even from the governor's office to try to save lives in the future. That is really the basis of leadership, taking that responsibility. And over the last 14 months, from the natural disaster of Sandy to other derailments to crime on the system, 2 trains colliding, and this most recent derailment, I think that you and just about everyone that I have come into contact here have handled these difficult situations magnificently. So I just wanted you to know that as someone who might have been there at some point, that I'm very proud of you, and I'm very proud to work with all of you.
Thank you. Mr.
Well, I think in conclusion, I'd just like to say that since I've been here anyway, safety has always been the uppermost thing in all of our agencies. And unfortunately, when we have an incident like this, that's when we review all the things that we've done to see if we've done them right. Well, I'd like to compliment our people, because over the years I've been here, safety's been always uppermost in everyone's mind. And yeah, accidents happen, and this brings out the fact that now we have to look further. Maybe there are more that we can do as a result of what happened with this particular incident. But safety has always been a focal point of this agency as long as I've been here. And it's not something that's been just forgotten, put aside, put on a piece of paper. There's a lot of people that work on the safety side of this that we don't see. And I think it's important that we recognize that. Okay, I need a motion to adjourn. Second? Second. Carry.